Welcome to our podcast, War and Freedom Inside Talks with Giselle and Walid. Congressman, thank you very much for giving us the time. You're going to be the first lawmaker to be interviewed by our podcasts,
Wow.
War and Freedom Inside Talks. So that's our first visit to a lawmaker on the Hill to talk about foreign policy, national security, and you have done a formidable job in those two fields, specifically regarding the Middle East and more specifically regarding this dangerous regime, the Islamic regime, I call it the Khomeini regime in Iran. And what got our attention, we are the two co-hosts of the podcast, is an article you published with your colleague, Representative Tammy, back in winter,
Right.
which actually focused on a matter that I hoped other colleagues would have caught at the time, actually in 2021. That should have been the case. Everybody should have been up in arms, which is the removal of the Houthi terrorist organization from U.S. terrorists on arrival.
On arrival.
On arrival.
On arrival
like
of the new administration, right? One of the first. So you think when someone does something when they first show up, that must be a priority, right? They must have been thinking about it before they came.
Yes.
Right? So, so first of all, thank you. I'm very honored. You're both world-renowned, so I'm the one that is honored to be with you and discuss this. So, the Houthis right now, and have been for some time, let's face it, are pulling the United States of America around by the nose. Men with flip-flops in John, what we call a John boat, like a rowboat with a motor on the back of it, and AK-47s are beating the most powerful military organization on the globe. And they're able in part to do that because the current administration, the Biden-Harris administration, has given them free license. And one of the ways to give them free license is to not designate them for what they are, so that American resolve, American resources, American policy can go towards defeating them. But it's not that, none of that is happening right now. Our resources aren't going, our mindset isn't going. The American people haven't been galvanized to know that the Houthis, a proxy of Iran, is an enemy and is a terrorist organization that should be so designated so that we can focus appropriately on their defeat and destruction.
Can I?
Yeah.
The excuse that was brought up when President Biden took them off the terrorist list was that financial aid needs to reach the Yemeni people.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that? I mean, we've seen this, like the Hamas is a designated terrorist organization right now. We're still sending billions of aid to the Palestinians, which is then, by the way, taken over by Hamas.
Afghanistan is a terrorist superstate, receiving millions of dollars in American aid every single week.
As we speak.
As we speak, right now, as we speak. And we can talk about what happens to that after the fact. But certainly America and Americans feel the plight of the citizens of Yemen that have had this terrorist regime imposed upon them. However, we cannot count on that aid reaching those people because it's going through the Houthis, who are stopping all the shipping in the Red Sea and are holding international commerce hostage and are literally holding the free world hostage. And yet your tax dollars are being sent to them as though that aid and assistance would go to the people that they're always essentially enslaving under their rule. It's an absurd proposition that anybody in America, and certainly that foreign policy makers, would consider as something viable. It's patently absurd, right? We're funding our enemy is what we're doing. But we're funding our enemy.
We're funding our enemy and the oppressors of those people.
Yes.
And we're doing the same thing,
right.
exactly, as you said, with the Islamic regime as well. We listed the IRGC as a terrorist organization. We have the Ministry of Intelligence that creates that's the brain of the regime that creates all of these terrorist plots. We have right now 5 plots against our President Trump we had a plot against my father, which they fulfilled. They took
Right,
as an
father's still in
American.
captivity.
They kidnapped my father. This is the Ministry of Intelligence that kidnapped my father, an American journalist, from the UAE and took him to Iran. And
So
are still
that's
holding
important
him.
for people to know. Your father didn't travel to Iran and was kidnapped. They kidnapped him in another country and transported him to Iran.
Exactly, and even in Los Angeles where we live, they had a terrorist plot, an assassination plot that we see right now against our president,
Right.
against my father, and against so many others that are speaking up. So these are all these branches of the Islamic regime. So the whole structure of the Islamic regime is not a government. Each part is a terrorist organization. We saw right now the ambassador in Lebanon, the ambassador of Iran in Lebanon, being blown up because he
Right.
has a
Pager.
Hezbollah pager.
Right.
So these are
They're all
not,
connected.
it's not an embassy, it's a terrorist hub, right?
Right, right.
Why are we not putting the entirety of the state? I mean, we did say the Islamic regime is a terrorist state, but why are we not sanctioning and putting the entirety of the state as a terrorist organization and dealing with them like that?
So that's an obvious question for you. It's an obvious question for many Americans. I think that many Americans cannot imagine, cannot accept or acknowledge that the leader of their country would sacrifice their national security, their hard-earned tax dollars, for a terrorist organization. So they must think, well, we're not hearing the whole story. We're not hearing the whole picture. But you and I, we all, those of us who are here, know that this administration is so desperate for a nuclear agreement with Iran that they will not they do not want to offend Iran by designating one of its proxies as a terrorist organization.
Absolutely.
They don't want to offend them. And so even though American shipping and international shipping is at stake, even though American lives are at stake, they have calculated that it's more important to make a deal with Iran than to deal with their proxies. And also I must say this, there is so much pressure from within the administration and outside the administration about how much money can be made in Iran, working with Iran.
That's the core of it.
Right, that's really, unfortunately, the money is more important to them than the lives or our national security.
That's our disaster.
And you can't imagine that an American president would put his own country's national security or safety of its citizens in peril for money. But Waleed, whenever there's a question, follow the money.
Follow the
Always
money.
follow the money.
Exactly.
Money. For the American public to understand what we call Iran, there are two things in Iran, right? We have the people of Iran and then the regime, if you wanna, because we would want you at one point to talk to your colleagues in Congress, and then your voice as a lawmaker can explain, we're not at war with the people of Iran.
people, right.
We are against the regime. So if you have a definition of how can we call the regime the best,
There are not Iranian, and I hear it all the time, saying like the Iranian regime, this is a foreign occupation. When you ask the people of Iran, in 1979, there was an Islamic coup. It was not a revolution, they call it a revolution. Revolution is by the people for progress.
Right.
This was Islamists and Marxists working together through manipulation, through money, of course,
money.
taking over the ministries, taking over everything, and bringing in Khomeini with a vow to destroy Iran. That was his first vow, like open speech, to destroy Iran in that burning flame, hold up Islam and spread it through the world. So that was.
So I would say probably many, if not most, if not virtually all Americans have a hard time drawing the distinction, right? The Shah was ejected from Iran, and then Khomeini, who was in exile, came back, right? And so many Americans say, well, he must have been Iranian. He was, and he came back, and he became their leader. And at the time, of course, many of us still remember 1979 and the hostage and so on and so forth. The visualization of that was the Iranian, somebody in Iran, people in Iran, taking those hostages, storming the embassy, so on and so forth, and then the Ayatollah rising to power. And so for most Americans, they think, well, if they didn't want that to happen, how did that happen? There's
Yeah.
many more Iranians than there are of Ayatollah, right? So how can that happen? And so they've never, first of all, I don't think they've ever been told to separate the two, right? But people do hear, and they hear on the Hill here, that the will of the Iranian people is to be free,
Yeah.
right? We do hear that, but then we hear the Khomeini and the supreme leader, the elected leaders and so on and so forth, chanting death to America and so on and so forth. And we see the visualization on the crowds of all these people.
Through the media.
Right, through the
Because
media.
they're focusing
Death
on
to
that,
America,
exactly.
death to the great Satan and all that stuff. And so most Americans say they don't draw a distinction between the Ayatollah and the people.
Yeah.
They don't,
Yeah.
and they're not educated to, and to follow your path coming from academia. Most Americans in my lifetime were used to seeing death to America overseas, especially in the Middle East, and particularly in Iran since 1979, the burning of the American flag and stomping on it and all that stuff, to now seeing that on American streets.
Yes.
Seeing that on America, how did that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
That's huge. One point here is that academia is responsible, so that's why we need to reform academia. But media that was influenced by
Sympathetic.
Totally.
Yes.
For example, there were millions on the streets of Iran in 2009, in
Yeah.
19, recently. And then there are sometimes demonstrations by jihadists.
Right.
CNN, what does it do? It focuses on the jihadi side.
And that, of course, I think, and we can disagree, I don't know how you feel about it, but I feel like the media was happy to follow President Obama, who abandoned the freedom movement in Iran,
Exactly.
and they took his side and took his cause of abandoning it because Obama was the one that started this whole Iran nuclear deal, right? And it's not a treaty, and we're just going to sign it, and we're going to allow Iran to continue with their conventional weapons program, including ballistic missiles, coupled with a peaceful nuclear program that, as we all know, enriches way above. It only enriches for a weapons program. That's the only reason to enrich to that. There's no other reason whatsoever. And Obama not only convinced many of our colleagues here, but much of America that this was the only thing that we could do. And unfortunately for people like me who we watched it and we fought it, we knew that it wasn't a matter of if Iran got nuclear weapons, but when they got the nuclear. And Iran got the exact deal that they wanted to. And the media was sympathetic to it because they were sympathetic to Obama, because the media is, as you know, very left-wing in this country. And so if Obama wanted it,
Then they'll do.
They want it.
Absolutely. What can we define the policies of Obama and Biden, US policy regarding what is their responsibility? What is the wrong thing they've done when they were in power 12 years in helping the regime do it?
No, Waleed, quite honestly, it'd be easier to describe what right things they have done because that list is very short. The list of, here's, certainly Biden in particular, it's been said about him that he has been on the wrong side of every important foreign policy in history, and certainly this is one of them. I can't think of one correct foreign policy that either administration has made towards Iran, not one. Whether it's sanctions relief, whether it's designation from a terrorist perspective, whether it's in negotiations, whether it's in diplomacy, whether it's in letting the leader of Iran to come to the UN while there's an active threat against the next president of the United States. There's not one thing that they have done that it's been in the interest of the United States or the West in general.
And they allowed actually regime influence here. I mean,
it's
been so active. We had conversations and every day with Giselle.
Not only allow it, but support it.
Yes,
Support
I
it,
think
yes.
that. And so, what do you think about the seriousness of that threat? Having these operatives inside our own government.
The seriousness of the threat is, unfortunately, we're seeing in real time reports of the Iranian plot to assassinate the candidate for president. This is out of the third world.
Yeah.
Operating with impunity in the United States. How did these people even get to the United States in the first place? But that's part and parcel to the misgivings of and judgment of this current administration and the thinking of people that are aligned with it, that people from Iran and affiliated. You don't have to come from Iran, right? Because, as you said, many people in Iran want to be free, but a lot of people come through Iran or are affiliated with Iran or paid for by Iran, and they're coming across a wide open southern border, not being checked. Terrorists on the terror watch list, not being interdicted, and they're in the fabric of our country now, operating freely. And not only that, but operating within the government.
That's serious.
Yeah, you know, CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, is right down the street.
Yes.
Literally like a block from here, right? But serving inside the Obama administration, promoting policies that are pro-Islamic regime or pro-Islamic Middle Eastern regime, the Muslim Brotherhood, etc., formulating policy that is not pro-American, but is pro-them.
But what worries me mostly are the people inside the administration. I mean, this is public information, right?
This isn't, it's not secret.
They're not secret.
Yeah, we have people in the Pentagon, like Ariana Tabatabai.
Oh.
We have people like...
So let's talk about that.
Yes.
Ariana Tabatabai, who seeks counsel from the foreign minister in Iran, is the chief of staff to the Special Operations Command in the Pentagon.
Explain that. What does she see? What kind of information?
Special Operations Command. So special operations are operating all around the globe, keeping American interests safe, and it is the pinnacle of military operations, small unit operations, very specialized for missions that are top secret and classified. And here's a person that is completely and directly connected to the highest levels of the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Islamic Revolutionary Guard.
I'm sorry, Islamic, yes. But thank you for the correction. Thank you for the correction. Working inside our Pentagon, and no one's questioning.
Yeah.
Right? And if we do question, we get zero answers.
Yes.
Does she act potentially as an advisor on these matters?
Of course. For, I think, 20-some years, they had, at the the Pentagon, I think, a lady named Anna Montes
Yes.
was advising the United States government on policy on Cuba. For all these years, was the top advisor, was a Soviet spy operating out of Cuba on behalf of Cuba. Now we had to ferret her out because she was Ariana, there's no question, and we already know it's public information that she consults with the IRGC.
That is the whole point. So, for example, when President Biden or his vice president are pressuring Israel for a ceasefire, they must have consulted. And these consultants would tell, oh, that would unnerve the regime.
Yeah, why instead of going to Israel and pressuring them for a ceasefire, Israel was the one that's attacked. Wouldn't you first go to Iran and pressure them for a ceasefire, since they're the ones that planned and facilitated the attack, right? Hamas conducted, but it's another proxy for Iran.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's true. So
we did not only not put pressure, I mean, like we were in front of the State Department last year in September when the Biden administration was doing this hostage deal that didn't get any hostages out of Iran, left my dad behind. And we, 2 weeks before October 7th, transferred $6 billion to Qatari banks for the Islamic regime. Even freezing that money, like tell me about the possibilities that our administration would have had to put pressure on these.
The administration has complete autonomy to pressure Iran and isolate Iran internationally, just chooses not to do so. But both financially, diplomatically, militarily, geographically, this administration, the United States of America, is uniquely positioned to isolate Iran and bring the Islamic regime to its knees. It's a matter of choice. It is a matter of choice.
Somebody's benefiting from not bringing them to this knees.
a lot of somebody's.
A lot of somebody's.
And some estimates of my friends who are in the economic field, usually brokers get 10%. So, and I'm calculating in my book, $150 billion, there is assumably $15 billion loose.
150 billion, you mean the Obama deal?
Yeah, the whole deal is 150. So 10% is $15 billion. What can $15 billion buy?
It buys a lot of influence, both domestically and internationally.
And
Right, there are companies all around the globe that want to do business in Iran. It buys their fealty and their acceptance, their advocacy, but also in this country, it buys a lot of influence in this building.
Well, yes, that's important. That's good. I mean, the intelligence community a month ago, said that the regime is trying to influence our politics.
Of course it
and when I
is.
saw that, I said, you know, with $1 billion, what you can do?
So I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee. We studied and discussed at length the JOCPA, right? The joint, the Iran nuclear deal. And some of my colleagues on the committee take up the cause of the Islamist regime and say, look, they're complying with everything. They're doing a good job. But all these claims are unfounded.
It is clear, I think, that the regime there, with the money that they got from two administrations.
Not only got, but get every week.
Yeah,
Every week.
that's an additional.
You know that we send millions of dollars to Afghanistan.
Right.
For humanitarian reasons and for security reasons. That money is siphoned off, not only used in Afghanistan for training camps for Al Qaeda, ISIS, Khorasan K, etc., but sent to and through Iran.
I think the regime has used the money that was sent to them and continue to be sent to them to actually intervene in our politics against the party that has disconnected them, right?
Without a doubt.
So money has been sent into our system. This is the mother of all meddling in our politics.
It's lobbying happening somebody pays for lobbying.
That's the point, yeah.
The travesty is the American people are paying for the lobbying against their own interests,
Yeah.
against their own freedom.
Catastrophic. So it's also for national security in America.
Yes.
It's not just in the region. And my concern is that you mentioned the border. We assume many have been coming to the border, but through also other means. We are bringing members of that regime to the United States and giving them.
We're allowing them to come here. We don't know where they are, what their intentions are, who they're collaborating with. We don't know any of these things.
So definitely.
And the law enforcement agencies are focused on domestic issues, not international issues coming to America.
Absolutely. So, do you think that the Congress and a new administration together will be able to put together a new Iran policy?
I sure hope so, but it will take leadership from the top. No matter what we do here in Congress right now, as long as President Biden and that mindset, which will follow on if Harris is the president, there's nothing we can do they're just going to subvert us, right? They will take the money and use it the way they want to, and they're going to support the regime.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately.
But because a lot of the general public is not interested in foreign policy, is not interested in national security. I think there's something outside, and they focus more on domestic politics. Can you explain the right of keeping the Islamic regime, like the status quo? What would that mean?
The threat grows every single day. I mean, look, the United States has left. We left Lebanon. We left Yemen. We're in peril. They're trying to get us out of Israel. The Islamist regime thinks, and I think with good reason, that they're winning.
Yeah.
The long war, right? 40 some years, but they're winning because they are running us out of all the places that we seek to be present and have an influence. Israel's the final frontier.
Yeah.
And so while people might not be interested in foreign policy, when a ship can't traverse the Red Sea or the Aden, the Gulf of Aden, and has to go the whole way around Africa, maybe you see a small difference in the price of goods and services, but that's just the beginning. The fact that we have foreign operatives credibly operating on American soil to assassinate our leaders.
Yes.
And the most, of course, high profile is the candidate for president, President Trump. But let's not forget that Iran, the regime, still has targeted the last Secretary of State or somebody else equivalent to Soleimani.
Yes, that's correct.
It could be anybody, right? Could be anybody. Or maybe it's a group of people equivalent to Soleimani. So maybe they take out 50 members of Congress or something like that in a coordinated attack. So while Americans might not think that foreign policy deserves their interest or their involvement, unfortunately, like a lot of things, it's going to be imposed on them at some point.
Like 9/11.
Right, like 9/11, the date was chosen for a reason, right? It wasn't just a random date.
Yeah, strategic. I gave a lot of lectures, seminars on national security, intelligence agencies, and I projected, and I have still the slide, I'm gonna send it to you, how will a regime organigram or targeting operate in the United States?
Right.
And it's exactly what you said. Politicians, leaders, military leaders, lawmakers, and intellectuals, even historians.
Right.
And the diaspora leaders, well, her father was targeted in Los Angeles. They know exactly what they're targeting at the end of the day.
And U.S. officials. I mean, my father is right now in a court, in an Islamic regime court, with 52 U.S. officials, including President Trump, President Biden,
Right.
President
But he's
Obama.
present there.
He is present there because they could snatch him and
Yeah.
kidnap him. But what does that mean for the other 52 who are on that list? Is that a threat to their life here in the U.S.? We have a hit list, so to say, by the Islamic regime
Right.
of presidents,
Yeah.
of U.S. officials.
And president gets protection, but there are many officials that have no protection.
That's true.
You know, most officials walk around, they leave their office, they go to a restaurant, they're out at the park with their children. They're living life in a suburban home without security. They don't look out the window. They don't check under their car before they start it. They don't do any of that stuff. And we're not used to that. But we weren't used to 9/11 until it happened either. We weren't used to going through all kinds of screening to get on an airplane. When I was a kid, and before 9/11, you could walk up to the gate
Yes.
with your mother was traveling, your father was somebody, and your kids or whatever. You would walk to the gate with them and wish them farewell. You're not getting. Life has already changed in America because of this, and we'd be smart to recognize that so it doesn't happen. We're not forced to change it again for the sake of the terrorists. People complain to me at the line at TSA, well, this is taking too long, and they go, I gotta take my shoes off of it. Well, thank the terrorists.
Yeah.
Thank the terrorists, right? And not only thank the terrorists, but thank a government that allows the terrorists to do this. And what's worse, thank a government that's paying the
Yes.
terrorists.
This is incredible,
Right.
that part, the last part.
Yes. Last question to you.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Bang, you've been absolutely amazing to get all of your insight. We have right now Americans, including my father, held hostage inside of Iran. We have Americans held hostage in Gaza.
Right.
More and more terrorist organizations are taking Americans and holding them hostage. And we have failed, in my opinion, in how we're supposed to get hostages back and save their lives. From your point of view, what should a government do when Americans are held hostage? What have they failed to do?
Islamic regimes, terrorist regimes, totalitarian regimes understand one thing, and one thing only. Their absolute annihilation if they don't relent.
Yeah.
America has, look, we walked out of Afghanistan. I was just in a committee yesterday. One of my colleagues on the other side said we surrendered. That's what Islamist regimes recognize.
Yes.
And as long as they think that they can continue to do that, they're going to continue to take hostages.
Yeah.
They also recognize the last president who made sure that Soleimani ended up in a bunch of pieces out on the tarmac. And the fact that the United States could reach out and deal with the lead terrorist if it chose to, and it chose to. That's what's going to make the difference, unfortunately. Look, these are savages, as you know, and they only understand force. That's what they understand. They see anything other than that as a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
And so while certainly we want to be, it's just like the people of Yemen that don't want the Houthis there destroying their lives and their country, and or the people of Ukraine that don't want the Russians there, or the people of Iran that don't want the Islamists there. But they're there.
Yeah.
And we certainly feel the plight of those who are oppressed. But you have to get rid of the cancer. You can't feed the cancer and hope that it will get smaller. And that's what we continue to do in hopes that it will get smaller. as, look, I don't know what history you need to see as a guide. It has not gotten smaller in any way, shape, or form anywhere.
I think the cooperation between, like we have right now in Gaza, the hostages that are there and the people that were harmed on October 7th include 43 nations, from 43 states.
Right.
If they would come together and put all of their leverage against the Islamic regime, against the...
Somebody has to lead them. And as long as they know, as long as America is going to be weak, it's not going to work. America is going to be weak as long as we have a weak leader. Obviously, Joe Biden is a weak leader. And so the answer, quite honestly, for not only America, but the free world is to have a strong America with the will. You can't just have the resources, you have to have the will to use them.
Yes, absolutely.
Judiciously,
Yeah.
but as long as the world thinks that you're never going to do it, they're going to continue.
We believe that your role is going to be more and more important in the future.
I hope that this isn't, like, the launch of your podcast isn't diminished by having me as your first guest.
No, yes, it's going to be aggrandizing.
No, we're honored to have you as our first guest.